So, what's up, guys? Today's episode of Systemic Flaws is all about tokenization. What problem is it actually solving? How does it work? And can it disrupt global finance as many claim that it will? So, quick intro. Hi, I'm Nick. I am Quantum Chain's Chief Marketing Officer, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's podcast. I would say I have a rather easy job because the other two people I'm with are absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Kai. I'm the head of business development for Quantum Chain, and hopefully, we're going to have a fruitful yet, I'd say, intriguing discussion for this podcast. Max?
Hi team, me again, founder and CEO of Quantum Chain.
Although this is episode 4, just in case people don't know what Quantum Chain is a post-quantum secure blockchain for financial institutions. It is AI compliant and built for institutional grade access to crypto, messaging, settlement, tokenization, and quantum stablecoins. So Quantum Chain powers the future of global finance. Now let's dive into it. The world of tokenization, because it is taking the world by storm. Every corner of the globe, Donald Trump, or the US, the EU, big names, JP Morgan, Fidelity, BlackRock, they're all going into tokenization. Apparently, according to Fortune Business Insights, which is a financial consultancy firm, the market for tokenization in 2023 it was 8.6 billion US dollars, and now it is at 23 billion USD by mid 2025. And they're assuming by the end of 2030 it reaches to 16 trillion US dollars. But before we go and deep dive into that, let's start off with the basics. Like, what is tokenization? And again, what problem is it actually solving? Or did fintech companies really just come up with a new way to create value out of thin air?
It's very simple, right? Basically, tokenization is converting rights to assets into digital tokens recorded on the blockchain. That could mean, your stocks, bonds, real assets like real estate, commodities. Think of it like gold. It could even be like weird things like your tea and coffee, right? Anything that can commoditize, and or even like private equity. It essentially gives like access to for us, the normies, access to like fractional ownerships of these assets. Yeah, I think Max could probably elaborate a little bit more and a little bit deeper about that.
No, you're absolutely right, Kai. I mean, it's tokenization, when you boil it down, it's just the process of bringing an asset on chain, right? That could be cash, that can be anything, but basically it's a contract, a smart contract, actually. When you create a contract on a protocol, on a blockchain, it's a smart contract that has automated parameters and triggers. And so you can customize it to do exactly what the original contract does. Like, let's say a bond with, a monthly payout, a quarterly payout, coupon, and it's just performed automatically. So it's the next stage in technical evolution of assets and cash and everything else. As we all know, I'm a firm believer that everything is going on chain, and I mean everything. Tokenization is the next logical step to enable that, to bring every single asset around the world on chain. Yeah.
Could you differentiate for me? What's the difference between a smart contract or the process of tokenization? Is it all the same?
No. They're all different parts of the process, of different parts of the technology, right? So you've got the blockchain itself, which is the ledger, the distributed ledger system. So where all of the transactions and everything is recorded. A coin is a vehicle, a means of transaction through that chain. So changing the data, and not to be mistaken, no data or value actually moves anywhere. You basically go back to where that first original piece of data was stored and change the metadata of it. And a smart contract is essentially a trigger system, right? So it's a list of triggers that happen if certain conditions are met. So let's say minting a token, but a token has a certain supply, it can be airdropped, a certain distribution, or many other parameters. The smart contract is what sort of initiates and continuously manages the process around that asset. So that's for minting, let's say, a token, right? Like a meme coin, for example. Very simple example here, right? So like Pepe was created in an ERC20 smart token contract. But a bond would be a different contract with different parameters, but ultimately the same thing. And in the end, all these smart contracts do is create all the tokens that represent that original asset in the first place, but can
Yep.
also, like, let's say, escrow some of the value and have like certain processes in place that you would usually have to do manually that just you can automate now. So, that's going to have an impact in things like investment banking in the future. There is a lot of sort of worry that smart contracts being predominantly self-managed and automated will cause a lot of jobs to disappear. Although I'm not sure. I think it's a bit like the AI argument. It's just going to change the landscape rather than kill it.
Yeah, just to add on
Okay.
that, right? I guess like if you're talking if it's gonna take over jobs, I think within where we are based in Singapore, yeah, getting back to that AI argument, right? I think it's just all about like upskilling and putting people
Yeah.
into different job scopes instead of just replacing, right? Especially it's very prominent in Southeast Asia where like birth rate is a thing, right? Where like everyone that has been in traditional finance are getting a little bit older, and upskilling them takes a while, but it essentially means that with the help of like smart contracts or even AI, you're essentially making your job easier at the end of the day, and you could probably like keep your job at the end of the day, and you could even work till like maybe the age of like 70 if you want to, as long as you're skilled enough to handle like the task at hand, right?
So it sounds like, at least from the consumer perspective, is what you were saying. In your words, Kai, it provides access to normies, allows normal people who don't have as much capital to, I would say, invest into higher grade stocks
Yep.
that they wouldn't typically have access to. And then you guys are implying from an industry perspective that it would make people's lives easier. But could you go into more details, like how exactly, what system would it replace, or what system does it make more efficient?
Well, look, there's a couple of things raised there. So one, Kai mentioned the word fractionalization, and that's what's giving normal people better accesses, and even like from a financial inclusion perspective, allowing people with less capital, like you say, to make investments where before they couldn't because of minimum order or minimum amounts that has to be invested in certain things. So it gives essentially everybody a chance to be involved and to compete as long as they have accesses. I mean, that's the banks and the fintechs jobs. What does it make easier? It's not about making it easier. We've talked about how user interfaces will not really be impacted, but what it'll do is behind the scenes, it'll create eventually, well, when all the correct tools have been selected, implemented, and it's all click together, it will create a level of interoperability that means when a user can make an investment, as long as the cost savings have been passed down to the user, it's not going to be an expensive thing to do anymore. There's going to be very, very wide accesses, but that actually brings up other topics like financial education that's going to be needed, right? So it's one thing granting accesses to everybody and allowing the bar to go down so everybody can get involved, but then you need people to know what they're doing. A positive comes with a negative, comes with the positives.
Yep. But I think from, I would say, a financial education kind of perspective, it is happening. And I think from the events I went to, both in KL and in Jakarta, even the fintechs are themselves taking steps to do their part in financial inclusion and also do their part in educating the masses. So I think in the future, it's probably going to be seamless, I would say, and it's probably gonna be a part like you going to the ATM instead of like you're now just using a phone to do it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, could you dive into interoperability a bit?
Oh, okay. All right. So when you're talking about interoperability, you're basically bringing up a lot of current tribalism. So you've got a lot of people that support the idea of Bitcoin, a lot of people that support the idea of Ethereum, a lot of people that support some of the others, and then you've got people that support us in quantum chain. And interoperability essentially is the mission that we all should be striving to, where interaction between chains, between financial assets, non-financial assets, cash, anything should be seamless, like Kai says. That's the word, right? You should not be feeling the friction between these things, and you shouldn't be adding an inordinate amount of cost to these interactions, right? So that's what interoperability is supposed to mean. That quantum chain can interact with Bitcoin, can interact with Ethereum very easily, but ultimately, what happens in this day and age, at least in this gray area that we're in, this transition period, is that to create interoperability, specifically between chains, not to mention, TradFi and Web3, you've got intermediary bridges that have to be created, which are almost exactly the same as recreating the same banking system we have now. It's adding costs, it's adding friction. Nothing is changing. So, when it comes to TradFi, linking to Web3, it's even worse, right? We've got on and off ramping that has to happen to even get cash on and off chain. That's a process that's kind of insane at this point, considering we're all trying to create a globalized interoperable system with, at least from our perspective, quantum safe national currencies. So, again, I'm going to go with our example here. Once we create quantum safe national currencies for, let's say 10 different countries, those countries' currencies are interoperable because they're all in the same protocol, which means that netting is cheap, means payments are cheap, everything's secure, everything's done in an instant, no problem. Now, let's say you roll USDC into the mix and there's still some settling in dollars going on. There has to be a bridge between those 10 currencies of ours and the Ethereum-based USDC Circle currency. That is going to add cost. It's going to add time. It's going to add latency. And it's probably going to add politics as well. So that's not helping with the mission of interoperability. But, it is slowly going the right way. These things are advancing. Eventually, these bridges are going to get simpler. And eventually, I think the banks are going to be absorbing on and off ramping activity. I don't think those companies are going to last much longer, to be honest. It's a very regulatory gray area, and there's no reason why banks and liquidity providers can't do it themselves, as long as policy deems that they can. So we are edging slowly to interoperability, but there's going to be some speed bumps along the way.
And I think with regulatory and legal complexities and even politics at hand, I think in what Max says, like the bridges are just going to get streamlined, but I think it's going to be pretty soon, right? Even possibly maybe even Q3, Q2 of next year, right?
I think so.
Yeah, depending on different circumstances, but I think that timeline is pretty set. Hearing from like what the conversations we have been between the partners that we've been speaking to, everyone's kind of saying it was like something's going to happen in Q1, which is essentially that's pretty makes you think that hey, 2026, something big's going to happen, and from that, I think everything's just going to like fall into place, and we're just going to line up at the end of the day. Yeah.
Okay. So in the world of tokenization, there's so many assets that you can tokenize, right?
All of them.
Among all of them,
even assets you do not know exist yet. Like, let's talk about, just for a second, just an example here. Prediction markets, right? I mean, look, we all saw the Jake Paul fight recently and the Andrew Tate fights and all that. Prediction markets are a big part of where the money comes from behind those. But you might soon be able to predict the outcome of a human being's success. And I think I might have said this once before, maybe on one of the first episodes, right? But betting markets are a derivative that can be infinitely expanded to anything, even if it's morally not quite right. So yeah, assets can be made out of absolutely anything. What we're doing different is regulated versus unregulated assets, but anything can be tokenized.
Okay, wait, on prediction market. So you already said Jake Paul, so that's the implication of athletics and sports. What else would you be predicting? What other measures of success are you talking about, like entrepreneurs and startups?
Yeah. Well, look, we already do that. We people are already investing in indexes. They're already investing in stocks, shares, equities, right? And most of the time, people don't even know what the process is. We're talking about the VC model where you've got fundraising happening all the way from ideation, pre-seed, seed, Series A's, and the like, right? So we're already betting on those successes, but they're not people. Although that does factor into it, of course, right? I mean, if you're betting on quantum chain, you're betting on me. But It's the entity itself. The entity is the regulated asset, but with prediction markets, you can essentially gamble on anything. So you can then gamble on an outcome of a presidential election, let's say,
Mm.
or even something simpler. I mean, it's a really silly example, but eventually you'll be able to bet on whether someone injures themselves during a polo match or something. Really silly stuff. But there's no stopping it because a derivative doesn't have the same rules as a regulated market does.
Yeah. Or like if you want to take a more esoteric turn to it, there's projects that are actually linked to successes for families. So there's like family offices where
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to make it into a prediction where like if this family what's their path is going, right? If their sons and daughters are going to good schools, and if they're going to marry any other like interrelatedly successful families, and then you can take your gander from that, and that's what people are selling for data, basically.
Okay. I'm not sure if you remember the whole idea of is tokenization just being built to create value out of nothing? Um, Sounds like it is.
No,
What's your take on
no,
this?
no. It's not. It's unification. It is, in my view, a good thing. Again, just the next step in technological advancement. If all cash, and bear in mind that should be the originator here. If all cash is going on chain, what are you going to do with it? Right? All assets then have to be on chain too if you'd interact with them. All point of sale receivers, for example, for making payments in shops have to be attached to that chain as well, at least from an integrated standpoint with wallets rather than bank accounts, so that that money can be spent. Smart contracts are in place not just to create assets, but also so you can maximize what that money does. Counter to that, there's also ways of monitoring and controlling some of that on-chain cash, which obviously that's come up recently in a slightly dystopian kind of way. But no, I think it's just the next step in the direction that finance is going. It's inevitable. I just wish people were a little bit more educated on the tools that are being selected for pilots at the moment.
I'm curious about that last statement on the tools. What tools have you been observing that is being selected for these kinds of pilots?
Look, I mean, a large part of our job, Kai and my job, is to go from country to country, to go from government to regulator to regulator, to discuss quantum safe national currencies. That is the next step of where this is going. And at the moment, we're sort of sat in this horrible gray area where pilots on blockchain are being undertaken right now, and there's only a handful of available options to do that with. So let's say you've got Ethereum, let's say you've got Solana. There's a couple of those. Cardano, funny enough, hasn't been used anywhere. But these are a way of experimenting, right? Of trialing a system, making sure that there's a skill gap being crossed, and like people understand then what blockchain is, how it's used, and how it's going to be applied to finance in the future. Now, unfortunately, we've been through this like every episode. I say similar things. They're not enterprise grade secure protocols. If you're not native, it's not working. If you're open source, get the out of it unless you're retail only. This not going to enterprise. So that's what I mean. Only solutions that were natively built, compliant built, by people who understand not just what the banks require or sovereign assets require, but how they're governed as well.
All right, you
Yeah.
did mention something earlier about betting on startups, betting on entrepreneurs, which is, I would say, segueing into tokenized stocks. This is what the internet is going nuts about. I mentioned earlier, Wall Street is now being a lot more open to tokenization. What does that mean to tokenize a stock?
Well, I think the person you're referring to is the CEO of Robinhood. So let's do what we always do, and let's segment the US away from the rest of the world, because
Yeah.
what they do and what everyone else does is usually very different. What Robinhood is doing is not tokenizing an equity. It's actually using tokenization as a way of creating a derivative of the value of an equity and then betting on that or buying the rights too, right? So it's not the same thing. The person who is saying everything is going on chain that you need to be wary of, or the two people, are people like Larry Fink. So the CEO of BlackRock, when that person says everything is going on chain, you believe it.
Yep.
Bill Winters has also come out and said that everything is going on chain, right? That's Stan chart. You listen, right? You don't need to listen to Robinhood. Correctly tokenized equities are still quite far away. What's happening right now is the equivalent of eToro selling ICDs. So they're just derivatives. They're not the real asset themselves. But soon, once the correct tools are selected and integrations underway, and a mass production of tokenized equities happen, it will get there. But right now, people are still arguing on some of the silly logic, like SPVs being used as wrappers and then tokenizing wrappers. It's just a silly way to go. It's not necessary. So we're still a little bit of a way away from proper tokenized equities, but it will get there.
Is that even a legal thing for you to wrap early like a synthetic stock, like something that's not even really owned?
It's not.
Then
It's
what
not
do
a
you actually
synthetic
buy?
stock necessarily. It's not like a CDO. Okay, we're not talking about that kind of wrapping here. We're just talking about taking the value away from the asset that actually is and betting on the value change. Right. Uh, that's possible. Again, it's like if you take an index, right? Let's say S&P 500. You're betting on the mutual collection of 500 equities going up or down, right? You don't own
Mhm.
any of it necessarily. There's no ownership connected to that. It's a bet, and that's fine. That's the secondary market. You can pretty much create anything you want as long as it's monitored well.
Quoting what you said, everything is going to be on chain.
Mm.
Does that mean every stock exchange in the world will eventually be on chain? And now then the normal thing for everyone to do is have a new interface. So whoever is in control of the current interfaces are the ones at risk.
It's
I
not the interface that needs to change, though. It's uh, it's the infrastructure underneath, right? So the interface can remain exactly as it is. As far as the person using the interface is concerned, nothing looks like it changes at all. It's the money flows, the nested flows, the asset, the custody, distribution, rails underneath. That's what's going to change. And the customer, the client, will almost not even realize when it's happened. It'll be overnight.
Yeah, and speaking of if countries are, you know, tokenizing or moving their stock exchange to the blockchain, they are already doing it. Technically,
Mm.
Brazil just piloted it. I guess Singapore is going to move soon in that direction. Central banks are already
SGX are
open.
already looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is happening, and I think like what Max said, right? It's gonna be overnight. Like people aren't gonna realize that it's already on blockchain and they're still just using it. But I think what's important is that foundation underneath, right? Like, are they using the right, I would say, foundation that it's built on, and that leads to quantum preparedness. Moving on to like even not even 2030, moving on to like 2028 even, or even sooner. If all the regulatory exchanges are going to be on blockchain, what's going to happen if one day Q day happens and all the stock exchange on the regulatory boards are affected at the same time because everything is 24/7 available. Yeah.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
If you're talking to a regulator or any of the people making these decisions on which blockchain could be used, what are like the top three things that they need to consider before saying yes?
Well, that's quite obvious, really. I mean, one, security. Now, obviously, we would say that, but that's the pertinent thing here, right? If your system is not going to last, it's not going to last. Two is compliance. All right. So every regulated market has a set of compliance rules, and we're not just talking KYCs and AMLs. We're talking MiFID, we're talking Volcker rule for the US if there's proprietary stuff going on, FATF, travel rule, etc. Third, which is obviously key, is scalability. Now, you can't just wrap up a blockchain and say, "Oh, we're scalable." I mean, quite clearly, that's not true. I mean, Solana had two outages now, so no, it doesn't. It's not that simple. You have to make it. You have to customize your chain with the idea, that very ambitious idea, that it's going to be used at a global scale from day one. Of course, it's not, right? I mean, adoption is tough. Like from our perspective, one sandbox success means the possibility of an entire country's not just domestic but cross-border payments and trade landing straight on our chain, and it has to be able to handle that. So scalability is absolutely key.
Yep. And I think, Max, one thing that we can add is transparency, right? If your chain is moving towards a more, non-transparent, non-regulatory kind of compliance, it could be, in fact, used, on the dark side of things, right? Which I don't think is very well regulated at that point.
It does exist. Of course it exists. And let's not even pretend that the banks aren't using them. Of course they are, right? You've got things like Monero that originally came up with that idea, this idea of anonymity and privacy in transactions. Now, I've always said that that's never going to get there. It's never going to work. Will it have a place? Yeah, something like that is always going to have a place. But you've got to remember that these tools behind them are people, right? So that's what's not going to survive. Maybe for a little while longer it will, but eventually what you'll have is this expansion of these big chains and products and tools being created, and then suddenly there's this vacuum down to a very small handful that are used, and the rest are going to be left to retail. And then you've got regulations. Are you even going to be allowed to buy crypto in the country that you live in once that happens without providing KYC, providing your identity? Maybe not.
100%. Or even if you provided your, all the KYC, if it's not a regulated chain and it's not compliant, your RWA or, your commodities might be stolen and gone into like a more, I would say, a darker kind of area. Uncle wouldn't want his real estate investments going into like funding terrorism, right? Per se. Yeah.
Do you know what? That's a funny point. And let's not pretend then that this makes any difference to what happens now.
For sure.
I mean, if I can raise securitization, right? I mean, the last I saw, US banks only need to hold 2% liquidity of the amount of cash held in account, right? So, and UK have been made famous recently for stopping people taking money out of their bank accounts, money that it's your money, you have the rights to, you earned it. But I think it was nationwide. The last video I saw were blocking a man from taking 3,000 GBP out of his bank account to buy his son a motorbike, and in the end had to prove not only his identity but had to prove where the bike was coming from, that the person selling the bike was real, prove his son was real, then basically tell the bank where his money came from. And I think it was a very simple job. And even then they were like, we don't have that here. You have to come back tomorrow. So, things aren't going to change in regards to moral gray areas when things move on chain, but some of it might be a bit more visible.
Yep. 100% agree.
Considering the moral ambiguity that the current system has, does quantum chain have a different stand on all of this?
Well, we're a provider, right? So when it comes to things like KYC, KYB, first line of defense compliance, that's not our job, okay? It's still the client's job, the bank's job, to ensure the people that they're interacting with, the businesses they're interacting with, are identified and making it very clear what kind of business they're in. That's not part of our job. We obviously automate some of the second line stuff. That's fine. We facilitate transactions and we're ISO 2022 compliant already. So great. That's fantastic. That's good for the bank. And it does help the enterprise side of things immensely. But when it comes to the variables of who you're dealing with, that's the job of the bank and the client.
100% agree. And I would say we could possibly work with people who fact check those things, your KYC or AML. But ultimately, what we would like to be is, non-biased, because we would like to operate in as many countries as possible, establish in that country, because it is, I would say the first and final line of defense for a lot of financial institutions.
I want to shift the discussion into, I think, a funny statement that Kai said earlier. In terms of tokenization, you can tokenize anything, even your coffee, even your tea. So there are two news articles that I stumbled on. The first one is the Trump organization is working with a Saudi partner to build a Maldives resort, an ultra resort, and they are tokenizing it. So essentially giving people access to own a portion of it. If the
Okay.
you can correct me. Okay.
I no,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not going to correct you, but I'm going to highlight what that article has not told you.
Sure.
And bear in mind, I have held a job at Allianz Global Investors before, where the predominant revenue comes from something called infrastructure debt. Now, infrastructure debt is building a stadium, building a school, a tower block, something unaffordable by the normal person, right? Or even by the usual institution. It's tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars project. So what's going on here in the Maldives is obviously some very high level individuals who have come together to use tokenization, tokenize the infrastructure debt product, right? Which actually is a great idea. It makes it very easy to manage. At the moment, it limits access rather than grants access, and it actually limits liquidity rather than adds liquidity. So what's happening there really is the doors are being closed to the everyman or even to the every institution, and it's a very seemingly membership bias project worth a very, very large amount of money that is going to be put out to a wider audience in order to raise the capital for the infrastructure build itself. Now, the debt part is quite simple. That's just the debt repayment. That's just a percentage and how often it's paid out. But doing that on a smart contract definitely makes it more efficient, as long as the people involved have likely paid in crypto in the first place, or at least a type of it, and have access to their wallets, blah, 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 right? So as long as you can access the system, then actually it's a pretty good way to do it.
Hmm.
And I think the idea is not far fetched, right? People like China has been doing it in Africa for like more
Correct.
than a decade, right? It just depends
Yes.
on like what form is the debt being repaid, right? Is it through crypto or previously it's through like natural resources? So it's just switching out an apple for a pear, basically. Yeah.
Sounds great if you're the one in charge of the real estate company. For the people who do invest, well, what does that mean? What happens if, for example, this project that Donald Trump is building in the Maldives, something happens. They cannot finish the project. Then what happens then? How does the defaulting work in that sense?
Okay, let's not pretend that a default's even going to happen with the likes of people that are involved in this.
Okay.
Okay.
We can look at a
These are
different
two people with access to Federal Reserves. That's infinite money. That's not going to go badly, is it?
Mm.
But what would happen is that's a conversation that goes way beyond the idea of tokenization. Um, I suppose if you don't raise enough capital, then you have to reevaluate whether the project can go ahead. I think there should be a cap on it. Like, let's say you're raising $150 million for the build. Uh, the minimum should be, let's say, $85 million for the contract to actually go through and activate, and thus go into operations. And the 85 million or whatever you raise gets paid out to actually start the build. I would assume that if it's not met, if the minimum is not met, then the money that was originally invested just goes right back to the original owner. And again, that's one of the beauties of the smart contract system, is that typically a bank would have to hold that money in escrow, or however they do it, and then return it all pretty manually, like chaps payments, everybody. So this is a better way. It's certainly more fluid. It's certainly more simple, easy, tracked, and automated. So from the perspective of something going wrong, yeah, it's easier.
Okay. So from consumer perspective, this then makes it less of a
From an
risk.
investor perspective.
100%. Yeah.
Hmm. Do you think all other, for example, anyone we would ever have to talk to is in real estate, would you recommend them to do this as well with their other projects or with their
Yeah.
future projects?
That's where this all started, right? This all started with RWAs. These are real world assets, not what we call TFAs, tokenized financial assets, which we should be clear that they are not the same exact thing, right? A real world asset is a physical asset that has a contract attached to it that is a financial product, right? Now, let's take a house. House has a mortgage. It's not the house that gets tokenized, it's the mortgage, right? But when Ethereum came around and people started applying that to assets, they tried to tokenize the house, which is stupid. So that's changed now, and people are starting to realize now that enterprise is getting involved in this that the best thing to tokenize is the contract itself. Because then all you're doing is digitizing that already digital contract, just in a slightly different way, a programmable way, right? Trying to tokenize a house, you're going to end up in trouble with accountants, with tax people, with with your real estate agents, with pretty much everybody, with the land registry. Yeah, not the best way to do it.
And I think the process itself is it's pretty complicated, right? But there are people doing it, right? Like there are companies in India, in Pakistan, in China that are tokenizing not just a house; they're tokenizing the whole real estate project, right? Where they're trying to even like crowdfund by tokenizing that whole development, which is pretty insane if you think about it. But weirder things have happened. Some of the projects are successful, and some of the projects just end up in limbo. That's just the risk that people have to take.
Well, that's true. It doesn't change the fact that you still have to fundraise. It's just a slightly different way of doing it, and sometimes actually it's more restrictive because the people who hold the most liquidity are not even familiar with blockchain and its use, let alone are active in it. But when cash ends up on chain, this whole thing gets easier. The ability to move money around without having to worry about audit too much because things are already pre-recorded or immutably recorded. Hopefully, it gets easier, much easier.
I'm going to push the conversation into the weird realm of the internet. So, Kai already mentioned it. You can tokenize coffee. I think actually we've already seen so many weird applications of tokenization, like the whole NFT thing.
Okay.
Where people were spending like hundreds of
Pause.
thousands of dollars like three or
Pause.
4 years
Pause.
ago, and
Pause.
what is this
Pause.
amount now? Okay, go.
All right. So when new technology arises and it isn't controlled in at least some way, not supervised, let's say, not controlled, but supervised or advised upon, it gets abused, right? Typically abused by people in insider positions.
Hmm.
We've not only seen with, what was it? What are those monkey NFTs? Bathing Ape or Club, whatever it's
Yeah,
called. Yeah. Anyway, those pretty much any NFT that came from the likes of Gary Vaynerchuk, um, and even the Solana lawsuit is proof that by using tokenization in a very fast moving distribution engine, you can manipulate not only prices but ownership, right? So that people, insiders, can get into these assets first as they're worth literally nothing. And then you put out to a market who then create a price value and not just volatility and some liquidity, but also basically see how far that price can go, right? Price discovery, at which point all the insiders get to sell and be happy. So let's not label tokenization or loop tokenization in with some of the bad players out there who have used it for meme coins and NFTs and like that. Or even people in the early days who try to attach music royalties to these things. But the use cases of tokenization now are abundantly clear. Very, very, very clear. I mean, the protocols are being updated, sure, but now we know how and why to use tokenization, and not just that, but like that we have to. So, yeah, the early stage uses, the utilities that people are using them for, I wish we could move away from those.
Right. All I have to say is marketing with extra steps, right? That's the early days uh
Yeah,
of that, right? You
correct.
get like influencers, you get like Gary V, just pushing that stuff. People buy into it, right? It's kind of like art,
In
basically.
Wow, whoa, hold on. In an attention economy, when you have marketing capability and go to market capability, yes, you can pretty much manipulate whatever you want, and it's very easy. Like art, that's interesting because art is still obviously an unregulated market where you can basically buy whatever you want as a tax write-off, get your friend or buy an appraiser to reappraise that art 2 years later at 10 times the amount and then put it back to Sotheby's and sell it to your best friend who has made that exact amount of money in taxes that they need to clear. So it becomes this revolving um, taxable market. So not the same thing. Can you do that with an NFT? No, because the NFT, or at least predominantly, doesn't go through an appraisal process in the same way. It's a token or tokens that go out to a market, and then it's the market that dictates the price, or at least if there's no market maker involved or any in the background who's fudging it. So not quite the same thing. And to be honest, thank God, because I think the art market and the way it is you know, one of
Right.
the last frontiers for regulation. That do we even want it to be
Do you
regulated? I
think
don't know.
like stuff like your RWAs were would pivot into that kind of function eventually, or if it's already been done?
RWAs no. NFTs is kind of where it's most connected. No, but I don't think so. I think it's more likely that as tokenization volume grows, you're going to end up with indexes on materials that we previously couldn't easily invest in. I mean, Jesus, nowadays you can invest in uranium, right? Did
True.
you know that? No, everyone's like, oh, gold and silver. No, no, copper, sugar, cotton, uranium now is a thing. But who's betting on tourmaline, right? Who's betting on tanzanite, right? There's one mine, one vein in one area of the world. Why is no one betting on that? No, you have to buy the real asset, right? But just like oil, you can buy 1 million barrels of oil and you'll never see those barrels, right? You don't want them. Imagine storing that. No. So you want access to the data. You don't want
Right.
access to the asset, right? So like lab grown diamonds, so let's not get into all that, but like
Oh man.
lab grown
Yeah.
diamonds have a value, right? And that value could be indexed and separated from normal diamonds soon. And that's purely because if you tokenize enough of these things, you have a worthy index to bet on. So soon, and we're back to prediction markets now, which is the new markets for these things, right? Soon, every single commodity, because we're talking about commodity markets now, every single commodity will be available to bet on. Things from plastics to different types of woods to titanium, anything, absolutely anything.
For sure.
Hmm. So that just means that regardless of what your business is, whatever your model is, you're actually now able to raise funds in a different way.
Mm, no,
Mm,
no. Because right now, raising funds on in a Web3 way versus a traditional finance way, that doesn't make it easier to do. It opens up a different market, different accesses, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the liquidity is there. It's not new liquidity. It doesn't work like that. It's a new market. One day, when everything's on chain, it'll be the only source of liquidity. And people trying to raise money in a traditional way is going to be non-existent. There'll be these tiny little dark pools that banks and wealth management companies and private banks are going to be like, okay, we still have access to this kind of money, to this kind of cash, this amount of liquidity, but it'll dry. But that could still take 5 to 10 years.
sorry, 5 to 10 years is when everything moves on chain. What is the 5 to 10 year timeline?
No. I'm saying it's hard to judge when everything's going to go on chain because there's going to be resistance, right? And we're talking about many jurisdictions here, 200 and something jurisdictions, not all grouping up to the same laws and policies. So if I had to take a guess, given where implementation of blockchain is now, that alone is still a few years away. Then moving all assets on chain, I think I've mentioned multiple times before that there's going to be a huge decommissioning, a massive problem in enterprise of unwinding all the shit that's been done. While at the same time, whatever useful tools are being used, those people are going to be expected to accept the assets on other protocols that were not sufficient. So then we're back to bridges. We've been asked, as we can provide quantum safe custody of assets, we've been asked if we can do that for a country. Basically meaning that all sovereign assets of that country is traded off our system, but ultimately is custodied back on our system. So, is that possible within 1 year, 2 years? Yeah, it is. Yeah, because those people have asked us. Soon, very soon, that domino effect is going to happen really hard, especially in early next year. But right now, because we just simply can't get around everywhere, a lot of people are still being given the wrong information. And so that is going to cause years of terrible embedding and tools that have to be unwound, and also terrible investments. I mean, there's been years and years and years of investments in even proprietary style protocols and chains that now have no use case. They're being forced into use cases.
And I guess even like speed of adoption to like traditional bankings that are essentially like the central banks are the regulators that push all these things out, right? How fast are they able to like unwind all of the basically the mess that they've made and implement proper protocols and proper rails, right? I would still say, start of next year, it's where the balls get rolling, but
Agreed.
through adoption, through like actually fixing the thing like deep inside the system, it might take like maybe 2 to 3 years even, right? That's the fastest I can think of.
I'm right now just going through everything that we've talked about. Is there anything else that people should know about tokenization that we haven't talked about?
We've covered quite a lot of ground, actually. We've covered compliance. We've covered the fact that the tools being offered or the tools being used to tokenize a lot of RWAs, TFAs right now, and there are so many businesses, even big businesses, like literally built around this, are being done on the wrong tools. The quantum risk is being ignored, and the liquidity is not an inherent part of the process. But ultimately, it's a good thing. I think everything is going this way. The retail user, I don't think, needs to worry about it too much. But what it will do, actually, maybe this hasn't been said, is it will allow the creation of new programmable products. Now, something I'm really looking forward to, something that we're going to dig into next year once we have more licensed partners, products that go beyond what we call Q-Day. So obviously there is a quantum risk. So we are thinking about products that won't survive beyond that time, right? Let's say quantum attacks, even conservatively, start in 5 years, which I don't think it'll take that long. It'll be as little as 1 to 2. Why would you have a product that lasts longer than that? Why would you have a mortgage? Why would you have insurance, life insurance? Why would you have a pension? It's not going to survive. Especially things like pensions, 401ks in America or Roths that have a significant amount of money and significant amount of liquidity, targetable liquidity inside them. So getting a pension system on chain, on a quantum safe chain, tokenized, of course, in a very similar way that a mortgage would be, with these recurring calculated monthly payments and interests, right? And then eventually ownership change. All the metadata is very easy to program. Making sure that those products are on a quantum safe chain like Quantum Chain makes sense, because that will survive the test of time then. They'll be future-proofed. That's what's going to matter to the retail user at some point in the very, very near future.
Yeah, or even like your insurance, right? Like your life insurance and stuff. Those are, I think, some insurance companies, the bigger ones, already think of putting it on chain as well. So
Yeah,
that's a very prevalent move right there. And essentially, I would say, can it last after Q Day? We don't know, right? So
yeah.
what's the next step for them if they're already thinking in that step? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, for us, we'd have to partner with these people to offer that service. And it's going to take time, but we're moving as fast as we can, and hopefully they listen.
Well, I think we covered a lot. We covered the basics of tokenization, went into what are the benefits of actually having tokenization. Consumer perspective, it's fractionalizing for normies to be able to invest into bigger projects. But at the same time, if you flip that around, that can also be bigger reach for the people in charge of these projects, similar to what you were saying earlier with the Trump project in the Maldives. Then now they have a little bit more control of securing their infrastructure debt. Then you go into um, the key things that people should be looking for in terms of a blockchain provider, which is security, compliance, scalability. That and a really big key point is realizing how much tokenization has matured. Gone are the days of investing into monkey NFTs. Um,
Thank God.
which have, I would say, shamed the world of blockchain and
It
cryptocurrency.
did. It has. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
a shame.
And now people are starting to realize, oh, wait, there is actually more substance in this technology.
I think because it's coming up to Christmas, we should say obviously a happy holidays to everybody. The year of 2025 has been extremely productive. Hope 2026 is even more productive. It will be for us. Look out for us in January because we'll be traveling a lot. We'll be in Dubai. We'll be at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Back to Dubai again, and then back to Singapore. And we will be not only kicking off our seed round. We will be We'll be minting our quantum US dollars or quantum dollars in January. Not launching because we're still tying things up with issuers, but that will be the first quantum safe stablecoin that we are going to be minting. It's ready to go now. It's just final tests, and then we're good to go in the new year. And yeah, sandboxes are starting soon. Conversions from LOIs to full blown partnerships are happening in Q1. So 2026 is going to be a big year for quantum and for the industry, and we're looking forward to it.
If you're a fan of the podcast, you can learn more about Max, about Quantum Chain, everything that we are about on our LinkedIn. Links in the description. Check it out.